Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Inside Housing Big Picture webinar. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this discussion. It's a great opportunity to hear from some of the leading thinkers in the sector at a really important time. I'm Pete Apps. I'm the contributing editor at Inside Housing, and I'll be hosting our panel today over the next hour. We're going to be talking about what's next, which is always the question that journalists and commentators and people who talk about a particular area are trying to answer, sometimes successfully and sometimes not so successfully. But I suppose it's rare in housing for us to be at such a point of uncertainty when there's perhaps quite a good vision of the next few years available and also quite a negative one as well. And it's not immediately clear to anyone exactly how the next few years are going to pan out. Just to set that in context, and this will be a context that will be familiar to everyone on the call. We know the challenges. House building numbers are flatlining, particularly in the capital, but to some extent or another, all around the country. There are challenges around the regulatory systems that we have in place. Some of them haven't been working as they should. The housing sector is dealing with the implementation of very significant changes, most notably Awab's law, but many others that are still coming to roll through the system. The challenges of the last few years around disrepair, around the remediation of fire safety defects and the long-term need to decarbonise housing stock have not gone anywhere. And all of those have a price tag attached to them, which becomes more and more difficult to meet with every year of rising borrowing costs and rising labour costs and all of the other challenges which within your organisations you'll be only too familiar with. That's the negative side of the picture. The positive side, the moment of opportunity, we have a social and affordable homes programme, which is larger than it has been at any point since 2009. We have a government that is not only pro-building new houses, but pro-building new social homes. And that's the first time we've had that as well since 2009. And even though it might not feel like it, we do have political stability at the moment. The headlines would suggest otherwise, but the fact is we have a government with a large majority and 4 years till the next election when people can make plans and get on with doing the jobs that you're supposed to be doing without having to worry about immediate changes of political emphasis and focus. There is clarity, there is funding on the table, there is political stability. In many ways, it couldn't be better. So we sit at this strange position of both positivity and negativity. The housing crisis is still very much with us. The current Labour government has broken the record for homeless families every quarter so far, and the implications of that and the financial and social and economic implications of that only rise with each month and each rise in the figures. So to talk to us about where we are, where we're going next, and the pathways through this, I'm joined by a terrific panel of speakers. I'll introduce them briefly and then we'll hear from them all and then we'll go into a discussion. I will encourage everyone in the audience to please put questions in. We're not going to be having slides today. We're going to be talking openly between us as a panel, and so I'll bring your questions in as soon as they're put in as appropriate as we go through the day. So put them in as soon as they occur to you. Don't wait until the end. We're going to hear first. I'll introduce everyone and then we'll go through for opening remarks. But we're going to hear first from Jasmine. Jasmine is the head of policy and campaigns at Crisis, of course, a national charity dedicating to ending homelessness. Her background spans roles across the charity and consumer sectors with expertise in influencing legislation, shaping public debate and improving support for people in vulnerable situations. We're also joined by Jamie Ratcliffe, who is the co-founder of Place Base Limited, a consultancy offering strategic advisory services to organisations working in and around the housing industry. I'm sure Jamie will be familiar to many of you, as well as a senior officer at the S&G Housing Association, and before that, the Greater London Authority. We also have Joe Marshall. Joe is the Chief Investment and Development Officer at S&G, where he leads the organisation's ambitious plans to deliver 25,000 homes across the next decade. He previously held senior leadership roles at Peabody. And we are also joined by Branwen. Branwen is the Director of Public Policy at the Places for People Group, and she was previously a senior civil servant, which included 2 stints in the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government and 1 in the Cabinet Office. So a great panel with great expertise, a wide range of expertise. Jasmine, as I said, I'm going to come to you first to answer this question that we've set for today's webinar. Where do we go next?
Thanks so much, Pete. And I'm so pleased to be here and to be talking about this topic and able to kind of speak to this from a homelessness perspective. I think, Pete, you really, really well framed kind of the challenges and chunky areas of discussion that are needed today. And I think from crisis perspective and looking at this from a homelessness angle, that point of this being a moment of opportunity is really vital and key. And the way I see it is that amongst kind of the broader challenges that we're facing and the things we need to balance to really get to the delivery of housing, one of the key strategic opportunities that we have right now is how we understand housing as a solution to homelessness. Homelessness is first and foremost the symptom of a broken housing market. And that means that we can shift how we view homelessness, how we solve homelessness through a housing lens. And one of the things at Crisis we're really keen to understand, and I hope we talk about this a little bit later, is how the housing strategy that the government is looking to publish will be linked to homelessness. And we would love to see ending homelessness as an outcome, a clear outcome of that housing strategy. And focus in on what's really needed from our housing market to deliver that. We will always be advocating for the really strong, robust delivery of social rent homes. And how do we bring lots of players in this space together to do that? We do need to work with developers, but how are we giving housing associations the capability, the capacity, the ability to deliver social homes, as well as councils and everyone to play their part? That social and affordable homes programme we've touched on earlier already is such an important and vital starting point and gives that long-term stability. But what more do we do in this space? And going down to another level, when we are delivering those homes, how are we making sure that they are going to people who are homeless? So we're reducing the backlog we're seeing in temporary accommodation, the children growing up without a home of their own, and people forced to sleep rough and sleep on people's sofas. I think there's more we can do in the space of allocations and how we're linking these infrastructures together. But the last thing I just want to end on is there's also some short-term desperate measures needed that we didn't see from the budget yesterday. We really welcome the lifting of the 2-child limit. It plunges children into poverty and effectively punishes children for being born into a situation that they have no say in. But our modelling and research that we've done with academic institutions show that that's a really important child poverty lever, but it won't have long-term impact on forms of homelessness. And so the missed opportunity at the budget yesterday was to unfreeze local housing allowance, the housing benefit for private renters. And that's another really key part of this picture when we're talking about that. So I'd love to talk about that today as well.
That's great. Thank you, Jasmine. I really like the emphasis on having outcomes in the government's housing strategy when it does come out, as well as just outputs, because at the moment 1.5 million homes is an output. What outcomes we want to achieve remains up for grabs. Bramwyn, I'll come to you next. Same question. Where do we go next?
Thank you. So much to talk about. So try and order my thoughts. I think like there's 3 axes, which I think is really helpful to think about: time, customer types, and geography. I think on time, as Jasmine said, it's astonishing we have over 170,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Like, that is an immediate problem. And we should be building new towns, we should be doing all of that, but that's going to take a long time. So how can we look at both solving the problems now and solving them for the future, and thinking, keeping those both in our head at the same time? So I think linked to that really about customers, like the customers we have now. So as a housing provider, you really need to think about how do we make our existing homes better, more energy efficient, nice places to live. Like, that's an immediate thing that we need to think about. And so you want to build more homes, you want to think about future customers, but you have to keep balancing that with existing customers. And if, you know, as a housing association for our board, that is a really important question that we need to keep going back to. And then you touched on it earlier, Peter, that geographies. I think London and the southeast, we've got high value areas, high demand, high cost. I almost feel like the system there is on life support. It is really desperate, and it's good that government have put more in. Is that going to be enough with viability challenges? I'm still concerned. And then thinking about outside of those areas, in the north, it may not always be high value, high demand, but there's still high need. So how can we still get those places going, look at regeneration and how you think about those different customers? So I think there's still so much to be done, but I do think the government have brought out a good kind of framework. I think we do have a lot of policy certainty. As you say, I couldn't see why the Labour government would give up this majority in this position. So I think we also do have this government for still quite a long time. So I think we've got a lot of policy and political certainty, and we just need to work through on that detail, really think about how we deliver within that framework and get good outcomes. I always say, you wouldn't get a border collie to catch a frisbee using Newton physics. You just chuck the frisbee and they get it. And somewhere between those two things, that we need to avoid overly complex things. So I would say we need to be brave. We need to look at really smart ways of using our money and our projects better. So I think, can we be brave on modular and get things going quickly for those people in absolute desperate need? Can we unlock money from our balance sheets by new investment models? There's so much we can do. And it is not straightforward, but we've got to be brave, or we will not fix the scale of challenge we're facing.
That's great. Thanks, Bronwyn. I like that kind of splitting into short-term and long-term goals, and I'm certainly going to come back to you on the question of modular. I'll come to Joe next. Joe, as for Jasmine and Bronwyn, what do you see coming next?
Thanks, Pete. I think reflecting on yesterday's budget, I mean, in some ways, I think it's kind of indicative of the recent kind of political and economic climate, that there's a kind of feeling of slight relief that it was relatively bland and stable, and there were no big bombshells. And I think for me, there is something about picking out some of those points from yesterday. Jasmine mentioned obviously the removal of the 2-child benefit cap, which is such a huge positive, because it is all about the customers who are living in our homes, and our future customers who are feeling the cost of living crisis most acutely. But actually thinking more about that long-term nature of governing, that is probably kind of lost in some of the headlines. But the government reaffirming their support for the DLR extension to Thamesmead. I mean, that is the sort of long-term infrastructure planning that we desperately need from our government to create both new homes, but also new jobs, and improve local people's lives and prospects. So I think I know it probably sounds a bit trite, but part of it, I think, is just we need to keep positive. We need to keep pushing on against the grain. The challenges are well rehearsed. I'm sure we'll talk about them this afternoon. But as Bronwyn said, that is going to take bravery, and it's going to take innovation, because going against the grain is not easy. But we do just really, really need to keep our eyes on the main thing, which is the customers, the people who are living in our homes at the moment, and future customers who will be living in the homes we build in the future. So let's not lose sight of that kind of the centerpiece of really what we're here to do as a sector. But it is going to take bravery and innovation to keep pushing on in an increasingly difficult environment.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. And Jamie, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks, Pete. So I guess there's a difference between what I think will come next and what will actually come next, but maybe I'll lean more on that. I think just in terms of reflecting on yesterday, I think Joe's point on it being bland is probably quite key. That I was at the NHBC annual dinner, and Matt Ford was there, and he was going to provide some budget analysis. But he basically said that sort of the comms coming out of the government are just incredibly poor, and how they're selling things, and then spent about 25 minutes talking about penis pumps, which I will spare all of you from. In terms of like my analysis, I think that Rachel Reeves might not take the ministerial code quite as seriously as maybe she should. According to BBC, the Deputy Speaker accused her of breaking it in terms of everything that was leaked. But she does obviously believe in the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. The main thing, I think, from the budget was scrapping the landfill tax, which some people had said was going to be £25,000 additional for every home, up to £50,000 in some places. There's also a bit of positivity around changing the rules on VAT on golden brick, which should help more affordable homes be delivered. But I don't think that gets away from the fact that the one thing that we're world class at a country at the moment is designing incredibly complex regulations and applying them to the letter and not the spirit. all of that regulation has overwhelmed home building, of people thinking that prices can keep on rising forever and you can just add more and more burdens onto them, and that's caused a viability crisis. I think there's a positive in the government's commitment to build, baby, build, but that's like a precondition for getting on and doing things, but just not enough in itself. We saw the additional 2% on landlords, which further affects demand, means they're much less likely to want to build, to buy homes, and therefore you can't build things that you can't sell. Home builders were ignored on their freedom to build. I think there is going to need some more demand support coming forward if it's carefully designed. I think the other bit that I would really like to see is around enhancing capacity in local government. And at the moment, we're seeing a sort of a slow death of the finances of pretty much every council, quite a lot on temporary accommodation, quite a lot on adult social care, quite a lot on children's special educational needs, which just means they can do less and less. There's also a lot of disruption from local government reorganisation, of people not knowing what those organisations are going to look like. And I'd like to see a real spin to give local councils an incentive to go for growth, to give them opportunities to share in that through devolving local taxes, and to really focus on placemaking in a way that's quite hard for them to do at the moment. And that, combined with taking away regulation, I think would see a lot more homes being built.
Thank you, Jamie. I should have said at the start, we did advertise the presence of Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing, at the GLA on this call. Unfortunately, Tom's been taken unwell, and so he hasn't been able to join us. I think we've also temporarily lost Jasmine due to a technical issue, but I'm sure she'll be back once that's resolved. I'm going to start with a question for all of you guys, which is simply, will the house building picture improve? I mean, there's support now in place for the London market. There was some expectation that there was going to be a reheated help to buy type policy yesterday, and there wasn't. And there's obviously some very structural issues, economic issues, which are holding back house building, which are perhaps beyond policymakers' control. But the question is, you know, we're at a low and we want to go higher. Do you see the numbers ticking up over the next 4 years or so? Joe, do you want to start on that? Because I know you've got a very big house building program under your control. So how do you see it from your organisation for a start, and then for the kind of wider market? Yeah,
so I'm entering this in the spirit of being an optimist. So I'm going to say it is going to improve. I think, as I've said before, you know, going against the grain is difficult. You know, a lot of the house building sector and other housing associations have been kind of forced into paring back their development programs, but at SNG we've continued to kind of buck the trend really, and continue to develop new affordable homes at scale. And I think, as I said, in that spirit of optimism, because things are so difficult at the moment, in terms of a kind of recipe for success and improvement, some of the ingredients the government is introducing around policy surely will have a positive impact on the house building industry. I think we're starting to see some kind of green shoots already in terms of some of the policy-based interventions that they've made. But I think, sadly, in terms of kind of when I'm thinking of tangible outputs in terms of number of homes delivered, I don't think we'll see much improvement next year. But it's almost the foundational elements that have been put in will I guess encourage that growth in the kind of medium term. And I think the OBR did come out yesterday, didn't they, and look and say that there's going to be a short-term drop, but they are forecasting a kind of rebounding post 2027 when the impact of some of those planning reforms and other stimulus have kind of had the opportunity to kind of take bite. But you know, the challenge, as I think Branwen said, is acute for housing associations. It's always the perennial balance of investing in existing stock versus new supply, and with the cost of bringing our stock up to what our standards are as a sector and as individual organisations. That is increasing the levels of regulation, and the cost impact of that is likewise increasing. So it is that fine balance between investing in existing homes and new supply, but it has to improve. And actually, in some ways, there is, going back to my first answer, there's something around a mindset of saying, actually we are here to deliver affordable homes, regardless of the economic cycle we find ourselves in, and it is going to take that courage and innovation to keep delivering.
I believe Jasmine just rejoined. I'm not quite sure. I can't see her on my screen yet. But in the meantime, I'll come back to you, Jamie. You talked about regulation in your first answer. One, what do you think? I mean, let's be specific. I mean, what do you think needs to change in the sort of regulatory environment, and also give us what you, as you did in your first answer, what you think you would like to see happen and what you think will happen in terms of that picture.
Yeah, so I think it does need a really forensic look through every aspect of what we're doing, and that I think I'll call out a couple of examples of just really thinking, what are you trying to achieve in terms of that regulation, and then what's actually happening. And it seems too much that we focus on designing something with an intent, but with not the result. And so, like, me and you, Pete, have talked a lot about building safety regulation and different aspects of that. It's clear the building safety regulator is not only holding up new homes, but it's also holding up making remediation projects and making existing buildings safe. There's a really good example this week from somebody I know, a leaseholder in Westminster called Chris, who wants to replace the double glazing on his building, on his flat, ground floor flat in a brick built building in Westminster. It's going to cost him £10,000 in fees and consultant support to produce a 150-page application to the building safety regulator to replace those windows. Those things are just clogging up the system, imposing ridiculous costs, but they're also applying to remediation contracts, talking to people of needing to get go through Gateway 2 in order to take off the facade and do investigations, come up with a proposal of how you remediate a building when you take off the facade. As everyone's seen, the building is then in a different condition to how it was built, and you therefore need to change your process and proposed works and go back through the building safety regulator. I think there's something quite simple that could be done in terms of applying the competent person schemes like Fencer. So that if you live in a house, you can get Fencer approval to replace your windows. Why couldn't that apply in high risk residential buildings? The reason it can't is because insurance is so expensive, and so it needs some support from government to make insurance available to those competent person schemes. I think I'd also like to just see a full review of all of the burdens that we're putting on new build homes, that if we accept that we want to see lots more homes, then what are the necessary burdens that you put in place? What are the benefits that can be delivered through competition and quality, which you can't regulate in a very tick box way? And I would also do a contrast of thinking about how the regulator of social housing mainly regulates. And so whilst there's plenty in the sector who moan about them, their approach to co-regulation is effectively they set outcomes that they want to see achieved, and they expect boards to take responsibility for that in almost every case. And now's probably not the time to debate it. Yeah, they leave how you do that to the board. Yeah, that doesn't apply in lots of other areas of regulation. It certainly doesn't apply in terms of how buildings are being built, and that slows things down and is reducing the output that we should otherwise get.
Thank you, Jamie. Just for those of you who may not have seen, there was actually news from the building safety regulator this morning. They've still got, I think by their own admission, quite a long way to go, but they did pass their record of number of decisions of all application types approved in November with 272, which is starting to eat into that backlog. And just a small plug for an Inside Housing article where we interviewed Andy Rowe last month. I think that the issues like windows and smaller works to major buildings are absolutely something that they're looking at reforming. So perhaps a movement on that. We'll never know. Bramwyn, same question to you. A little bit of what's going on at Places for People, and then your view on the wider market. What do you see happening with home building?
So I think Joe summed it up really well. Like, we're here to build homes. We'll build homes. We want to build more homes. I think we will see more homes. I'm optimistic about that. What I would like to see is more homes more quickly, though, and it's getting that ramping up faster. I think that's a real challenge. I think two specific things from yesterday. Someone said earlier it's quite bland budget. Actually, in some ways, bland budgets are quite, at that kind of general scale, bland is good, because I think markets have taken that as a positive, and borrowing costs should go down. And I just think it's very basic economics that we forget is, for all the grant we get to build new homes, we have to borrow the rest of that development costs, and all our borrowings cost money. We're responsible borrowers, we have to pay it back. So the cost of borrowing at the scale at which we're building is a really significant thing. So I think that is good. What I do find frustrating is that we do need to get on and get all the different bits of the jigsaw in place. I would have loved to see rent convergence at £3 yesterday. I'm really glad we didn't have a no on that. So like the conversation is still open. I think the ISA first time buyers, maybe which help the market, that is still open. But I think it kind of speaks to this point about, so we're going to come back to this in January, like building houses takes a long time, looking after houses over the long term. Like we're looking 30, 40 years in our business plans. So the idea that we might have a decision in January that we're going to get out there, which will impact on customers in April. So we've got to really think about how quickly we can do that and then get that money into our business plans if there is a decision that is helpful. Like we've got to be realistic about how do these things track through. And if you're a big business looking at 30 years, you can't be doing sudden decisions. And I do wonder if we could just help government understand how these things work through our governance processes so our boards can make sure we're making good decisions and giving customers fair notice. So I worry about that. And on the rent convergence as well, back to that point about local authorities, I think it's hard for us to make sure our boards have long enough and our customers have long enough. If you're also looking at committee structures in local government and getting that through, that is the challenge. All my career, I have wanted reform of local government, but I do wonder, like on top of everything they are dealing with right now, it's a lot. And I think the chances of them massively upscaling building is really quite low. So I think the rest of us are really going to have to think about how we pile in and do more. So it is hard. If I was a commercial house builder, I just worry about all the costs on people. Like I can't see how are you going to, I think over time, house price inflation has helped their business model. And that I don't see how that's going to happen in a sort of quite low growth economy. But RPs should be counter-cyclical. That's what we're here to do. And I think the final very specific point I say, I would love to see the regulator be harder on us, actually. We are here to build. And if we're not doing that, we should be pushed on that, because otherwise future customers won't get, we think so much about existing customers, and that is right. But I think the regulator also needs to kind of push on that future customer point as well.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I do just want to stay on just for a moment, just before I bring Jasmine back in. I think we've got her dialed in, but I just want to stay for a moment with you three on this question of rent convergence, because it's obviously a very live issue, which the Treasury, as you said, deferred to January, but didn't say yes or no on. £3 a week is what many people in the sector are asking for. I think London councils were asking for that last week. It has to be acknowledged. I think it has to be acknowledged that would be a sharp rental increase, albeit in the among the lower rents in the sector. But for the individuals paying them, it would be a quite a rapid escalation of costs at a time when they are probably struggling with the cost of living crisis that everyone is. So, is there an argument that that's just too high? I'd invite anyone on the panel to give some thoughts on that.
I think Pete, for me, it is about the communication around rent convergence. I mean, even the name, it kind of just is particularly unhelpful and opaque. But it's about fairness of rent. Having somebody living next door to someone else for exactly the same home paying a different rent, there's inequality there, and I think it's about how that is communicated. But the reality is the cost pressures we are facing as a sector from every single angle has dwarfs those convergence amounts, and actually it's a really difficult time. And to pick up what Brandon said, it's for me, we're sitting down in all these housing associations looking at our long-term financial plans, and prolong this announcement until January, that does not help our long-term financial planning. But from a practical challenge of us having any chance to implement it, and to your point, Pete, how we make sure that that's communicated to our residents is absolutely imperative, rather than just issuing a letter without any explanation. Means that our ability to implement that on the 1st of April is hugely impractical. And so that looks like it would feed through to April 2027. I think the G15 did a study and said that it was about £120 million each year being lost from the rent convergence. And that money is directly taking away from either capacity of new supply or ability to invest in existing homes. So I think you're right. You know, it is a sensitive topic that has to be dealt with really carefully with our residents, and demonstrating the benefits that that extra income will deliver for them personally. But you know, I'm just frustrated that it's been prolonged until January, because actually the two elements of I guess positivity and for want of a better phrase, upside within our business plans around the extra grant we get from the 39 billion and the rent convergence, and actually we're going into another financial year with lack of clarity in those two areas.
Bram, when you're nodding, anything to add to that, just on that specific question of, we could do rent convergence at £1 a week, £2 a week, or £3 a week. They're all on the table. Is there an argument that £3 a week would be too fast?
So for me, it is really about working with customers. I think some customers will have this covered through government support, so they will be okay. And that's about, and I think subsidised housing does need subsidy, and we've got to get good houses. There's no point keeping people sort of stuck in a house that's not working for them. So I think it is important that we get that investment, that we make sure the houses are right, and that's what the government support is for. We need to give people good warning. And the truth is as well, you know, we are here to help people and to house people. It is incredibly hard, you know, to get into debt and and be kicked out of a social house. We do look after people. I do think it's part of those letters need to be so carefully crafted. It's like, you know, if you're going to struggle with this, please pick up the phone and just thinking about that wording really carefully. And we will have teams, so we'll find the people who actually, there will be cases where this will be a problem for people. We will find those people and we will help them. And it's thinking about how to, but for some people it'll be okay because they're below what is considered an affordable social rent. So it's about getting the right support to those people, and we just need time to do this carefully and mindfully and not rush it. That would be the problem for me, if we just run out of time to do it well. And what will happen then is we just won't do it for a year, and then it's the future customer who won't get the new house, or the customer who doesn't get, you know, the boiler upgrade or whatever it is that's going to make their life better. And what you could see is people saving £3, you know, on rent, but actually they're then paying higher energy bills because we haven't been able to get out and do their boiler upgrade. So it is all quite circular, but it's all about thinking, we've got to think big and also per customer, and we can do that, and we will do that.
Thank you, Bramwyn. Jasmine, I want to bring you back in. I think Jasmine, we have.
Can I just come in briefly on that, Pete?
Yes, certainly.
So I think your point is really important, and that we do need to think about the human cost of this. And like £3 per week convergence for unconverged rents would probably be about double the increase that we're seeing from the CPI inflation for those rents. So it is quite a significant change. And I think it is important that it's communicated sensitively, and both Joe and Bramwyn done that really well in talking about the wider impact. There's some in the sector who talk about putting the customer at the heart of everything, and when they've talked about things have just gone straight to the financial impact of it. So I think you need to balance it. But I think the essential point that was also made by Bramwyn and Joe is, like, social rents are already a very low rent, and these are rents which are well below that. So it's about getting to a level which is deemed as a suitable level, and trying to get there as quickly as possible creates greater capacity across the board. I think the delay in this is really interesting, and we'll probably never know, but is this caused by the sector effectively lobbying for the £3, which wasn't an option in the consultation, and so therefore I think if it was gone for, would need to be reconsulted and therefore push things further back? Or is it a chaotic interaction between Treasury, MHDLG and DWP, who just simply couldn't agree on the response to the consultation? So maybe how quickly it comes out in January might answer some of that.
I mean, I have no internal insight, but I think a bet on chaos between different government departments is often a safe one. Jasmine, I want to bring you back in to answer a couple of questions that we've got in from the audience, which I think are linked. And one of them, I'll read it out briefly, but I think a key problem, this is the question, I think a key problem for Labour has been a lack of quick wins for people who are struggling now. How well does the panel think the budget balance between long-term versus short-term wins? And then a second, I think, connected question is, how do local authorities balance the need for new homes with the crippling cost of nightly paid temporary accommodation? So, I mean, obviously, homelessness is a you know, it's what crisis is all about. And you mentioned in your opening remarks the LHA unfreezing that we didn't see yesterday. where do you think the government's sitting between this question of short-term and long-term answers, and what more would you like to see happen?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I'm so sorry I disappeared. I did come into the office for a reliable Wi-Fi connection, but that hasn't turned out to be a safe bet. In terms of the question of kind of the short term and the long term, I think what we have seen from government, and it has been very welcome in the last 18 months, is more of a focus on some of the long term kind of interventions in housing that were needed. So we've already talked about some, such as the Social and Affordable Homes Programme. Obviously, there's a conversation around long-term rent conversions, how we balance the need of customers, and we would really agree with that, and the kind of impact on people who could put them at risk of homelessness, and maybe additional support government should think about there to balance what housing association needs and then ensuring people can afford their rent as well. We've also seen movement in things like the Renters' Rights Act, but I think what we're not really seeing is a shorter term focus on overall affordability, which is really important and linked to some of the conversations around kind of how housing associations, how the housing sector is supporting people on the lowest incomes. The thing that's kind of the elephant in the room for me is that the welfare system is driving some of this, and in some of the work we're seeing, it does end up, and there are housing associations making huge efforts in this space, but they're working against things like people being impacted by the benefit cap or bedroom tax. That makes affordability very difficult. We do essentially have a situation where some people are seen as not being able to afford social housing, and if you can't afford social housing, where do you go? We know the private rented sector is largely unaffordable and increasingly so because of the frozen LHA rates. And therefore we are essentially directly driving demand for temporary accommodation, and for people who aren't accepted into temporary accommodation, rough sleeping, sofa surfing and other forms of homelessness. So I think the kind of short-term measures in welfare really do need to be looked at. We completely understand that local housing allowance, there's an overall question over that and what that looks like in the long term. There is that long-term argument of if we can increase the supply of social housing and really focus in on that, we should start seeing less of a reliance on the private rented sector for people on lower incomes, but it's going to take time to see that come through. And so we do continue to advocate for the government to put that investment into local housing allowance. And I think there's an argument here that they can tie some of this in with the Renters' Rights Act. So because you will have in future the ability to kind of have landlords on a private register, have more quality standards in the private rented sector, you can start looking at how these systems work together, where local housing allowance is going. Is it supporting landlords to also deliver homes at high quality? How can we have better answers in this space? And in the interim, we do need to get some investment in to support people right now so they're not being pushed into homelessness. On the question of local authorities, it's another really, really good one. And actually, the biggest increase we're seeing in temporary accommodation is of nightly paid temporary accommodation. Another kind of significant thing that does need government attention is the temporary accommodation subsidy. So lots of local authorities are paying out for temporary accommodation and only getting subsidised for temporary accommodation levels from 2011, which means they have massive gaps in their budget, putting huge pressure on them. But what that also means is often local authorities are responding very, very in an emergency situation and supporting people in what's available, and it is nightly paid accommodation. So we need to relook at how do local authorities get support to contract out with a longer term view into better term quality accommodation that they can actually move people on from and not be in these emergency situations of having to find people accommodation urgently, or they'll be sleeping rough that night. And I think part of the answer is stepping back from government and looking at what the role is of other public institutions as well. But that, I think, strays into where we want to see the homelessness strategy go. But I think there's a few levers we can pull there if we bring together the homeless and the housing strategy and look at those two things together.
That's great. Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, and just again, a small plug for Inside Housing's content. The responses to the budget coverage yesterday are available on the site, and I mean they really do reflect what our panelists have been talking about. A lot of the people in homelessness and that sort of world are saying very similar things to Jasmine about the welcome step to abolish the two-child cap, but this absence of ideas about how to start to deal with the homelessness pressures that people are facing as well. I want to ask either Bramwyn or Joe or Jamie to just talk about this other big change that has just arrived for the sector of Awab's law. I mean, obviously we've been expecting it for a very long time. It's only just into force. It's only partially into force as it stands. What do you think is going to happen over the next year and 2 years as that reform starts to take effect in the sector? I'm happy for anyone to sort of catch. I mean, who wants to come in on that first? You're nodding a lot, Bramwyn, so I'm going to come to you.
Never nod, that's this. I think everyone's been working really hard to get ready. There's been a lot of sort of internal IT issues, getting our repair teams ready. And I think everyone is doing their best to kind of get out there and do it. I think what I am concerned about is that obviously there's such a focus on this one issue, and we're going to work really hard to get that right. We've got to be really careful over time that doesn't crowd out other issues. And it's that sort of long-term, short-term again. We'll make sure, I think we'll focus really hard as a sector on getting this right. And we'll probably make mistakes somewhere. There's always mistakes with new things. And it's a lot of different properties to look after. Somewhere a phone call will get lost or something, but we'll do our best. I think we'll do well and probably better than we're expecting, but that in the focus on that, we might miss something else. So about all sorts of other issues, what about older people in properties that overheat in the summer? Like that is not something it's like the opposite problem. We don't spend enough time on that. So just trying to keep all these other issues also in view, and that we don't just deal with damp and mold, that we keep investing in the homes to make sure other problems don't become a sort of a big problem in the future as well.
Shall I jump in?
Yes, sorry, I was on a different tab, just checking something Bramwyn said there, so I missed my mute button. But Joe, yes, please, over to you.
Yeah, I'll kind of in danger of always agreeing with Bramwyn, so you're gonna have to lean on Jamie to give the contrary view to make it less harmonious. But I think look, we are getting to grips with the rollout of phase one, and I think the sector, S&G in particular, we're using phase one to make sure we're kind of operating in a kind of compliant way. But actually, we've seen a huge increase in volume of things classified as urgent, and that's probably actually been driven by our own caution towards it. It's better we've taken the view of erring on the right side of caution in these early days as the law's being implemented. And as Bronwyn said, just getting our house in order really when it comes to data and making it just absolutely on point, but putting together scorecards and dashboards flowing through the organisation. But really, I guess, getting ready for these kind of expanded hazard categories. But to expand on Bronwyn's point, there's a balance, isn't there, between chasing kind of compliance to actually proactively supporting customers and making sure that we are delivering services and in a way that is truly meeting the customer's need. And I think my concern is that we're having regulation on top of different regulation, so actually we're just layering up, which is driving organisations to create customer facing teams to be focused on compliance and doing the bare minimum. And actually, there is this risk as we're layering on those levels of compliance. Are we always creating a different sort of industry of service provision? So those are the challenges that we're facing at the moment. But it's totally the right thing to do. But it's just how we operate that kind of regulatory environment that is so fluid and changing as every week and month goes by.
Thank you, Joe. And the reason I was unable to unmute myself when Bramwyn finished speaking was I just wanted to check, because you mentioned the pensioner in the overheating home, and I'm sure, just for panelists who might not be aware, the excess heat does come under the 29 categories in Awab's law, and it applies in phase 2. So from that 2026 period onwards, excess heat will become part of this regime. And of course, as we kind of move into an era of likely hotter summers, overheating will increasingly go up the agenda in as a housing and housing maintenance issue. Jamie, I want to bring you in on this sort of same question to as I put to the other two panelists, but to add one from the audience who points out that the primary focus on new build and grant availability means that HAs have less ability to regenerate housing that is well past its sell-by date and at risk of failing Awab's law. So I wondered if you could give us some thoughts perhaps on the future for estate regeneration as well, because obviously the challenges around build costs and planning and viability always come into that just as much as they do to new build.
Yeah, and so overall, so I did the law degree, and one of my favourite things I learned from it was some very colourful quotes from Lord Justice Denning, and my favourite one from him was, "Bad cases make hard law." So when something terrible goes wrong, as it has clearly done in this case, that trying to build up rules and regulations that address it just don't make sense. And in this case, kind of, if you read the coroner's report, it was scathing of the emergency healthcare that Awab received. There hasn't been any additional laws applied on emergency health providers that have been here. I think the only thing I agree with Rory Stewart on is in his book, he talks about any law that's named after a person is prima facie a bad thing. And I think that does apply here. I think how you apply this is really challenging. And so Joe talked about like basically treating most things as if they're an emergency. And I think that is what most providers are doing. That is going to gum up the system. And like, observing how repairs have worked to date, I think one of the things that people have found most challenging is identifying who to send to repair what. And that should be quite simple, of like talking to somebody, what is wrong? What is it you want to get fixed? How is it that can be fixed? And if we can't do that straightforwardly, then doing a kind of triage on what are your health conditions, which are much, much more complicated, and how might they interact with this observed problem, I just don't think can be sensibly done. And if you look at overall, like what repairs are happening through the TSMs, I think it's about 85% happening in time within about 20 days. That's obviously well outside of the timescales for Awab's law. So like, what seems quite a lot will fail, how then will things flow through the courts, I think is going to be the bit to focus on. I think that point on what it means for existing buildings, and I think like it seems that Rochdale Borough-wide Homes have recognised that these blocks of flats and these typologies aren't fit for purpose for the future and need to be redeveloped. Like one of the knee-jerk responses from government was to ban them and other people who are failing on their consumer duties from accessing grants, so actually make it harder to rebuild homes. So it's like thinking about how those rules flow through. And I would include the Homes England rules on additionality also in terms of how money flows into Section 106, but that is a separate thing, as being one of the problems. And that so only counting the additional homes and only putting grant into them obviously makes it much, much harder to regenerate, because you've got additional costs in demolition of buildings that aren't fit for purpose. And then you've also got the income stream that you're getting from those existing buildings, which make viability much worse. For me, I would design rules which are around, is it the right thing to do to demolish these buildings? And I also know in this country, we demolish such a small proportion of homes, only demolish 0.002% of homes, which means a new home built today has got an expected lifetime the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza. So we do need to be demolishing more homes. Once you've accepted that it should be demolished, then you should appraise it in the same way any other scheme and recognise actually there's going to be some higher costs, but there should be some placemaking, there should be some quality things that are coming from that regeneration.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. Jasmine, I'll bring you in on a question from the audience, and also one I will come to Branwyn next on. And that's the question of modular building and MMC. And the reason I'm coming to you with that, Jasmine, first is because Layla Baker from the Better Temporary Accommodation Alliance asks, how can we ensure that exciting ideas around modular drive lasting change that will ultimately help end the temporary accommodation emergency? So just wondered if you've got any reflections on this idea of quite rapid housing development, perhaps through modular, to sort of immediately relieve homelessness pressure. There's obviously, it sounds like a very attractive thing to do, but there can be some unintended consequences if the housing that comes out of the other end isn't up to scratch. But do you have any thoughts on that issue? I think you're muted, Jasmine. Sorry.
There we go. I couldn't get to the mute button in time. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and it's something we're often asked. I mean, we are definitely in a situation where we need to pull all levers and explore all options, and we've seen potential of modern methods of construction in lots of different spaces. I think the thing that we're always cognizant of, and actually we did a kind of APPG inquiry, so we run the secretariat for the APPG for ending homelessness, and we did a joint inquiry a couple of years ago now with the APPG for housing markets and housing solutions into conversions, into permitted development rights. And one of the things that was clear is that these can be modern methods of construction, and some of those broad tools can be used really well. And we don't need to come in and have lots of regulation, for example, but we do need to have a sense of minimum standards, because we have seen some things in the past developed not to great quality, and to be really frank, expecting people to live in, I guess, homes that none of us would feel comfortable living in. And I think if we're doing this in a meaningful way, where we do provide good quality homes that any of us would be happy to be living in, then we should absolutely be exploring that. But it's how do we reflect those really good schemes, those good qualities, and make clear where that's happening and show the potential of that, whilst also having some guardrails against some of the kind of poorer quality things that are done, and prioritize speed over anything else. So that would be the only kind of caution that we're quite cognizant of. But that's not to say we would then go out and say, well, no, we shouldn't be exploring this. We absolutely should, but we should be holding it to a standard that any of us would be happy with.
Thank you, Jasmine. Bramwyn, just to put it slightly differently to you, I mean, sometimes the famous quote about nuclear fusion energy comes to mind when we talk about modular, and that it's eternally 5 years away. Certainly in the time I've been reporting Inside Housing, there have been huge, what appeared to be huge steps forward on modular, sort of L&G Homes and some other really big players getting into this space, and they just haven't worked. You know, what if that is going to be part of the solution going forward? What's going to be different this time that might actually make that something that plays a real part in the supply issue?
Yeah, but what I love about modern methods is you can get speed and you can get consistency. And I just love, if you've been to the factories where they have the robots, they make it and they make sure things like the installation are right, you know where the wiring is. You think about, if as housing providers, as RPs, you're looking after these homes long term, actually knowing what components are in, knowing where the wires are, all that stuff means you can provide better service for the long term. But thinking specifically about the temporary accommodation crisis, I would love to bring modular in more there. And very similar to Jasmine, I think we have seen poor quality, poor infrastructure and poor support, and those things need to be fixed. And we can do it. PFP have got a scheme in Bristol, quite a small scheme, but where we put in modular homes, infrastructure, and there's wraparound support as well, because these are quite a specific group of people living there who need specific support. So we've got that, and that is working really well. And so what I think, though, you've got places where it works, places where it's not. We do need, Jamie's like, oh no, more rules, but we need some sort of framework to sort of just give us some guardrails on this. Say this is the quality, not just of the product. The product must be right and must meet the fair quality, but also the infrastructure. And if there are people who have special supported housing needs, that needs to be provided. And it can't just be in a random field somewhere. It probably needs to link into an existing community. But I don't see why. That is not rocket science. It's not nuclear fusion. That is something that policy people should be able to sit down with enough will, work together and do. And I think maybe we've seen too much product kind of led delivery and not enough. What is the problem? What are the components we need? And then, because that's how you do anything else, you say this is what we need and go out and commission that, not be led by the products. But I do think we have to do it because we have a crisis, and it's not a PFP thing. It was Roll Along. So Roll Along had a unit outside the GLA recently, and I went in there. I've got primary school kids. And the first thing I noticed, there was a washing machine, and that is, I cannot imagine how hard it must be with kids in a Premier Inn, no washing machine for weeks. And I sort of got a bit emotional. I was like getting in there. I was like, we need to get people into homes where they have what are really quite basic things, washing machines, cooking facilities, and all that stuff. And this could be transformational. And if we are building big scale estates, we will not do enough before the kids who are in temporary accommodation now are grown up and gone. So we can't mess around. We have to work together and get it done.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, I suppose in some ways we are housing homeless people in modular built structures, except those modular built structures are owned by hotel chains. Jamie, I remember in a previous life wandering around the field in Beckton with you while you were chaperoning one of your politicians around an Ilka Homes development, or show home. Where we are now. A few years on, Ilka Home went into administration with debts of over 319 million. So it wasn't a pleasant end to that story. What do you think's gone wrong with modular in the past that we could kind of learn from if we're going to do this better in the future? I'm getting a death signal from Jamie. I don't know whether that's because he didn't like my question or something technical's gone wrong. Joe, I'll bring you instead on the same question. What can we learn about modular?
I mean, it's a kind of fairly obvious thing to say, and hopefully Jamie will to kind of come in a second. But it's all around the kind of the certainty of demand and supply when it's coming to modular. And I the only thing I think vaguely to add is actually looking at the opportunities like coming through with new towns of having concentrated geography guaranteed. Pipeline of homes coming through, standardization. Someone mentioned earlier before just that the cost of building a new home, whether it's a flatted typology or a house, is just at the point where the cost of value metric is just becoming prohibitive. So I think a lot of it comes down to that kind of certainty of the order book and for these large factories, and actually is there an opportunity with the new towns to create that kind of certainty. But that's probably a good time to hand the baton back to Mr. Radcliffe as he's joined back on.
Yeah, apologies, I lost the mute thing. I was looking through the questions and then it obviously hid that bit of it. Yeah, I guess that goes to your question about how things change. So that Ilka bit was at the far end of the docks in Beckton, as you rightly said. So what's changed in, I guess, 8 years is now it's the other end of the docks. And so the installation with weights and roll along is just behind what's now called City Hall, but I'll always call Siemens Crystal. Hopefully neither weights nor roll along will follow the same fate as Ilka. I think that in terms of how you change things, I think there's three things that I'd look at from the past. One of which is, I think one of the problems that happened both with the design for manufacture stuff from English Partnerships, Housing Corporation pushing things, but also going further back to sort of significant modular and panelized construction in the 1960s, was people were kind of made to do stuff. So there's lots of people who are against this because they were told they had to do it as part of funding rules, and therefore they begrudgingly did it. And when it went wrong, they remember those projects because they were made to do it, whereas lots of projects do go wrong. And I'm sure people on this call have got good examples of it. But if it's your decisions that made it go wrong, then you might remember them less than someone making you do it. I think that Branwen's point was also really good in terms of product led. I think there was definitely something around lots of people saying they had the best possible solution and you should only work with them, and there wasn't interoperability between different platforms, and so actually that made it weaker, because the big problem with modular is if you're halfway through your stack and the factory goes bust, then how do you finish that off? That is a lot harder if you know no one else can build exactly that thing and carry it on. You have to take it all down. And then I think there's also something about just like a secure pipeline. And so one of the problems, which I guess is partly planning related, but it's lots of other things, is like a stop-start nature of development. And if you've got a factory, in order to get the full efficiency from that, you need to be utilizing it all the time. And so talking to Weights and Roll Along, part of their pitch is that they won't just be building these modules for temporary accommodation, just for accommodate. They've got a whole range of other uses, some of which are primary schools, some of which are prisons, some of which are large construction sites, some of which might be asylum seeker housing, but you need that breadth to utilize the factory overall.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm jumping in there because we're coming into the last few minutes of the session. And I want to give the panelists, I'm going to be extremely mean and put you all on the spot, but I think it was Branwen in her opening who talked about the outcomes that we need from housing strategy, rather than just an output. And I just give you all the opportunity. If you're being put on the spot and you really don't want to answer, I'm not going to force you. But what outcomes would you like to see the government set in their housing strategy when it finally does come out in the new year? There seems to be a fairly obvious one for you, Jasmine, because it was actually you, not Bramwyn, who said it in your opening. So I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to hear mine will be around ending homelessness. The 1.5 million target is admirable. We're really pleased it's been set, but more importantly is what are those homes for? If we deliver housing, but we continue to see more children growing up in temporary accommodation, people becoming homeless, having to leave their work to go into temporary accommodation, what are we delivering housing for? So a simple one is ending homelessness, but even below that, we'd love to see kind of ambition to ramp up to 90,000 social homes per year delivery. It's a long-term target, but let's set that ambition.
Thank you, Jasmine. Anyone else on the panel, just before we end, want to offer an outcome for housing policy? Jamie?
Yeah, so I think safe, secure and affordable homes for all, much greater economic prosperity, the chance for people to see a positive future for them and their family. And I think that's what you can get through growth. I'd also add an output that I would rather change the target from 1.5 million homes to 400,000 homes a year in terms of starts by 2030. I think that would be more ambitious and see like a greater focus in policy making.
No small aims then from you, Jamie. Then anyone else? Bramwyn, Joe, any thoughts on what outcomes you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'd just build on that. So yeah, get rid of homelessness, do what Jamie says, the houses. I would love to see that housing strategy be about places and really putting pressure, not just on the housing bits of the system to deliver, but housing is part of an ecosystem. We need infrastructure, we need doctor surgeries, good schools, good train stations, good, all of that other stuff. And the other government departments need to be plugged into that strategy with their outcomes from it really clear as well.
Joe, I've tiptoed a minute over time, so you're going to have to be very, very succinct. But what would you like to see? Quality
and placemaking at the heart of it, not just numbers. That's me.
Amazing, thank you. All right, well then it falls to me only to thank our panelists for sharing their time and sharing their thoughts. And thank all of you who submitted questions. I'm sorry I couldn't come to all of them. But yeah, I think it's a great discussion, and we'll be back with a sort of more of a group discussion format where you can be more proactive at joining in later on today, which I think Jamie will be joining me for. But in the meantime, thank you once again to our panelists. I hope everybody's found the discussion helpful wherever they've been following from. Thank you.